I was thinking this morning that I'd begin by saying that this project, in a sense, was 31 years in the making. It was in 1986 that I went to work as a correspondent in Mexico for the Arizona Republic. It was September of 1986, 1 month before Congress passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, the famous or infamous IRCA. I was thinking I'd like to begin today by quoting briefly a book published just before last year's election, written by the journalist John Judas. The book is called The Populist Explosion, and he writes about the rise of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders in our country, but also about the rise of populist parties in Europe, and he writes at various points in the book about the role of immigration anxiety in the rise of populism. And he has an interesting description of the circumstances under which populists gain strength. He said, quoting here, "Those circumstances are times when people see the prevailing political norms put forward, preserved, and defended by the leading segments in the country as being at odds with their own hopes, fears, and concerns. The populists express these neglected concerns and frame them in a politics that pits the people against an intransigent elite." I think we've certainly seen that with immigration, with public anger at immigration, and with the formation of a backlash against excessive and uncontrolled immigration, especially illegal immigration. And in researching this, and I came to CIS because I wanted to have the chance to do research in this depth. It's, after 30-some years as a reporter, it's been really sad to see how much energy and time has been drained from investigative long-term reporting. But I got a chance to spend a good 6 months working on this project. And it's fascinating to see how long and how consistently, from the 1970s, when Democrat Peter Rodino of New Jersey proposed the first bill to make hiring unauthorized workers illegal, that Democrats back then were leading voices for immigration limits. And there's been a sort of a trend line over the years away from that, where they have become part of a populist left to some extent that is pushing for more immigration and that regards limits on immigration frequently as based in bigotry or anti-immigrant sentiment. It's that I think is very painful for those of us who believe that immigration restraint should be reasonable and humane and in the best interest of the country. And I wanted to contrast that statement from John Judas with a caller to C-SPAN in 2013 when the Senate was preparing to vote on the Gang of Eight bill. I have found C-SPAN to be a treasure trove of information. Their video library, if you just enter the terms immigration or enter Lamar Smith, enter Doris Meisner, about whom I'm about to talk, former commissioner of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, you come up with remarkable information that helps you form a history of immigration policy. And that's really what this is an attempt at. It's a history of our policy since IRCA, particularly as regards enforcement. As you recall, IRCA was supposed to be a compromise combining a one-time only legalization, aka amnesty, with measures to stop future illegal immigration at the worksite, to demagnetize the worksite. And there was also a Border Patrol buildup. It was called at the time a three-legged stool. So you had legalization, you had worksite enforcement, aka employer sanctions, and then you had a buildup of the border. Well, I was struck when Doris Meisner came on. Doris was talking about the Gang of Eight bill and favoring it. And this really poignant call came in from a man who identified himself as Phil from Minot, North Dakota. I'd like to just read you. Here's Phil. "You have people in this country trying to run their businesses legally. They pay their taxes. They pay their workers' compensation. They pay their insurance. And you have other businesses hiring illegal immigrants. They hire them, they know they can't cover them with insurance, they pay them less money, and they don't cover them with workers' comp. They don't cover them with liability insurance, so they can bid the job way cheaper than anybody running their business legally. If you're running your business legally, you're not hiring illegal immigrants. So I don't hire illegal immigrants. So I have to bid my job to cover my expenses in this country. So I am going out of business because you guys are allowing people to hire illegal immigrants. And they're really damaging this country. I don't understand how people cannot see this. I mean, they are putting me out of business because I won't work illegal immigrants. Now, in 30-some years of reporting, I came across many people like Phil in the country and on C-SPAN. C-SPAN is a marvelous resource. And I would contrast that, as I do in the book here, to what we were told in Congress. First, we were told that IRCA was a serious effort to control illegal immigration. And then we were told, especially during the Clinton administration, that our government was really getting tough on illegal immigration. President Clinton made control of illegal immigration a major theme of his run for re-election in 1996. There's a lot about that in the book, and I'm going to see how much I can cover of that in the few minutes that I have now. But I want to go back to an editorial from the New York Times during it was a 5-year debate, fascinating debate, that led up to the passage of IRCA. First, we had the report in 1981 from the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy, headed by Father Theodore Hesburgh, president of Notre Dame and former head of the Civil Rights Commission, and one of many liberals who believe that we must have limits on immigration. Barbara Jordan, later, we'll talk about her, also was the same way. And increasingly, they have become what I consider myself sort of a contrarian liberal. And although my friends on the other side of the immigration debate have disavowed me a long time ago in terms of any liberal credentials. This is from the SCIRP report, SCIRP, Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy, to Congress in 1981. The Commission believes that a legalization program is a necessary part of enforcement, but it does not believe that the U.S. should begin the process of legalization until new enforcement measures have been instituted to make it clear that the U.S. is determined to curtail a new flow of undocumented illegal aliens. Without more effective enforcement than the U.S. has had in the past, legalization could serve as a stimulus to further illegal entry. Now, that, of course, was prescient. And that is exactly what has happened. The IRCA delivered on the amnesty. It did not deliver on the worksite enforcement. And so we've had a system ever since where we have sort of pretended to enforce the law, but not really seriously. And some members of Congress, notable among them Lamar Smith, have attempted to restore integrity, or at least establish integrity, for the first time in the verification process. And perhaps Congressman Smith will talk about that. But it has been remarkable to see how many times people of authority and knowledge have pointed out this hole in the verification system for workers, and yet we have been unable to patch that hole. And that is because of the power of the forces that kept that hole as part of the 1986 legislation. Chuck Schumer was able to cut a deal to pass IRCA in 1986, in part by going along with the language being watered down so that verification was not credible. Father Hesburgh, who tried to have a credible verification program, who urged that it be included in IRCA, was very disappointed and said that a worksite enforcement program without an effective verification program, said it was meaningless. He said, like kissing your sister. Here's the New York Times writing about this topic. Any sensible immigration reform requires a verification system. I should say this is 1982. You'll see how much the New York Times has changed in the years since 1982 in their editorial approach. So we need a verification system. It says, the best way to deter illegal immigrants is to make it harder for them to get the jobs that lure them. The best way to do that, in turn, is to make it illegal for employers to hire them. Employers can only do that if they know who is illegal. Verification, however, is opposed by such divergent bodies as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which fears red tape for employers, and the Mexican-American Legal Defense Fund, which fears discrimination against Hispanics. Now, Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund, MALDEF as it's commonly known, had a very powerful and respected spokesperson in this regard, Vilma Martinez. And here's a comment from Ms. Martinez during the time when IRCA was being debated. For Mexican Americans and other Americans who share the physical characteristics of persons thought to be undocumented, employer sanctions will exacerbate existing patterns of employment discrimination. Well-meaning employers, fearful of government sanctions, will shy away from hiring us. So this was an argument that was repeatedly made. We had people who said, well, we have to have enforcement in order to protect the work site and make sure only authorized people, including unauthorized immigrants, have access to jobs. But others came back and say, well, this is going to have very negative effects on our people. Raul Izaguirre, who at one time ran the National Council of IRCA, in 1990 tried to get employer sanctions repealed, calling it the civil rights issue of our time. Now, that effort to have it repealed was defeated, but only after a battle in the Congress. So we had the IRCA passed in 1986, but the gaping hole was verification, and that hole was exploited by the proliferation of a fraudulent document industry that reduced the I-9 verification process. I suppose you're all familiar with the I-9. That's the Employment Authorization Verification Form. It was reduced to what David Martin, former general counsel of the INS, called an empty ceremony, because employers were able to pretend to believe that workers were authorized, and the workers were able to pretend to be authorized by presenting these phony documents. That industry had always been in existence, but after IRCA, it proliferated. It became a multi-million and perhaps even a multi-billion-dollar industry over the years. And so this gap in worker verification was obvious to everyone right from the beginning. Several times in this text, I point to the work of the Government Accountability Office. The Government Accountability Office repeatedly said, you've got a problem here, fix the verification process, and stop throwing money at the border. Congress has always found it much more politically palatable to put money into the Border Patrol than to control the work site. And if you don't control the work site, if that job magnet remains active, people are going to find a way, at least many people are going to find a way to get to that job that's being offered to them by employers, especially those who are willing to violate the law, to find people who, in the words of former Labor Secretary Ray Marshall, work hard and work scared, is what Ray Marshall said. He was secretary during the Jimmy Carter administration. Mark, how am I doing on time? A couple minutes. Okay. I will try to compress this. I think it's fascinating to see what happened in the 1990s, especially during the Clinton administration. That, to me, was a remarkable story, and I try to tell narrative stories, narrative journalism style in the book, and to see how enforcement at the worksite imploded, especially during the Clinton administration, especially during the second Clinton term, was really interesting. Clinton talked tough about stopping illegal immigration until he was reelected. If you look at his 1995 State of the Union address, he's running for office, he's running for reelection basically still at this time, at the beginning of 1995. And listen to this appeal to populist anxiety. All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. He used the term illegal aliens, which of course is way un-PC at this point, today. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public services they impose burden our taxpayers. Clinton pledged to, quote, better identify illegal aliens in the workplace as recommended by the commission headed by former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan headed another commission on immigration called the Commission on Immigration Reform, whose report in 1995 also called for making the verification process credible. And no one ever accused Barbara Jordan of having any animosity toward illegal immigrants. She was a powerful voice. Roy Beck, here with us, knows that very well, and actually founded Numbers USA to continue Barbara Jordan's work. When she died in early 1996, that was a terrible blow to those who tried to bring some coherence and integrity to the worker verification process and to immigration law in general. So many stories. We followed this through all the way to the end of the Obama administration. I do think that the Clinton years, the 1990s, were key. By the end of that decade, the die might have been cast. One of the hearings that's written about in this book happened in 1999 when Congressman Smith was furious at the INS announcement of a new plan which basically said, look, we're not really going after people just because they're here illegally. We're going after the criminals. You called that in a hearing a bright flashing light which says, come on in as long as you avoid further problems with the law, you're going to be okay. And that was official INS policy by the end of the Clinton administration. And during the 1990s, huge growth. The population of unauthorized immigrants grew from about 3.5 million in 1990 throughout the decade at what demographers now say was an annual average of 500,000 people per year. During the 1990s, they were estimating that at about 250,000, but now they say it was 500,000. So during a 17-year span ending in 2007, the number of unauthorized immigrants grew from 3.5 million to a peak of 12.2 million. And this is at a time, much of this was happening when President Clinton was promising the people that he was serious about worksite enforcement. He wasn't serious. He capitulated to the interest groups, including some very interesting Chinese Americans. A guy named Johnny Huang was written about in a really good investigative piece by the Boston Globe, influenced President Clinton to not to back the idea for limiting legal immigration. Okay, I've gotten the word, big stop sign put up. Plenty more to talk about. That's just an introduction. Thanks for the time.